Alrighty, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining New York City Bird Alliance for the first installment of our winter lecture series. My name is Tasha Nowla, and I'm the New York City Bird Alliance's Public Programs Manager. Before we start, I have a few quick reminders. Please note that our lectures are being recorded and will be posted later this week on our website for anyone to view. But don't worry, only me and the speaker are on camera, so you won't be in the recording. Also, we do have closed captioning enabled for the Zoom and in the recording. During tonight's lecture, we ask that you please type any of your questions in the Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can open by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the lecture, I will ask questions out loud to the speaker and will answer as many as possible. I'd now like to take a second to share with you all the mission of New York City Bird Alliance. New York City Bird Alliance, for those who don't know, is a conservation nonprofit that works to protect wildlife birds and their habitat in New York City. We work to make the city a more bird-friendly place through conservation science, advocacy, and engagement. A unique and essential part of our organization's work is the science research projects we lead, including bird and biodiversity monitoring across the city. Vital to our work are our community science projects where everyday New Yorkers help us collect data on bird populations and conservation threats. We then use this data to inform our advocacy efforts through which we aim to make New York City more sustainable for wildlife and people. We're currently focused on making the city's bird buildings safer by pushing for laws that will require buildings to turn off unnecessary lights at night and to use bird-safe glasses in windows. We need everyone's help on this, and you can get involved by writing to your elected officials and attending rallies. But this all starts with our engagement efforts to connect people with the magic of birds. Every year, New York City Bird Alliance hosts hundreds of bird outings, classes, workshops, and festivals. We hope by engaging New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs, we foster an appreciation for birds and nature found in this city, inspiring them to take action. You can find out more about our conservation volunteer opportunities, advocacy efforts, and see our full program calendar through the links in the chat. Tonight you join us for one of our longtime programs, our winter series, this year called Spread Your Wings. In this lecture series held monthly November through March, we'll be joined by birders, authors, and conservation scientists who will discuss the wonder of birds both around the world and throughout time. We hope to expand your knowledge and interest in birds not only in New York City, but across the globe. I want to thank Claude and Lucienne Bloch for their ongoing support for this program. I'm now pleased to welcome our speaker tonight, Randi Minetor. Randi is a best-selling author, writes the Bird Finding and Best Easy Bird Guides series for Falcon Guides, and is the author of Backyard Birding and Butterfly Gardening and Best Easy Day Hikes Buffalo. She writes for Birding Magazine, is a regional report editor for North American Birds, and served for 3 years as the president of Rochester's Birding Association. Her most recent book, The Complete Language of Birds, is an encyclopedia that unites classic illustrations, science, folklore, and mythology of about more than 400 species across the globe. Tonight, Randi will share with us tales told in that book, bringing us back to a time where birds seemed like magical beings with the answers to so many of the world's questions. Since New York City Bird Alliance is focused on connecting people with the magic of birds, we're delighted to have Randi here with us tonight. Randi, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Tasha. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to the birders of New York City. Thank you so much for making this possible. So let's get right into it. In the beginning, there was a goose. This goose, in fact, an Egyptian goose, and at the time, the only being in the universe. Egyptians called it Gengenware, or the Great Honker. This goose carried and protected the egg that, when hatched, would produce all life on Earth. But another being actually laid the egg. That was Geb, god of Earth, also known by the nickname Great Cackler. Whether or not Geb was actually a goose himself is subject to interpretation, but when he evolved into human form over the centuries, he often wore an Egyptian goose or another bird, like this one, gull, I think. And he wore that as part of his headdress. Egypt's creation story included a third being, Amun, Lord of the Thrones, who also liked to take the form of a goose, as you can see in this petroglyph. In fact, the legend says that Amun's goose cry of victory over his adversaries became the very first sound heard by the people of Earth. And to commemorate this, Amun is known as the Great Shrieker. So Jeb laid a golden egg that contained the sun. Gengenware incubated and hatched the egg that brought all the other beings into existence. And Amun's goose presence scared off all the early adversaries. The result was, well, let there be light. Who knew that a goose could be so powerful? Meanwhile, in another creation, down at the southern tip of Africa, the indigenous Khoisan people tell the story of their creator, a god called Suigob, who ignited a great fire to bring all of the traits of the animals out of the ether and into reality. He gathered all of these traits and baked them into all kinds of animal shapes. And as he did this, a Cory bustard, a very large bird with broad wings, served as his helper. The Cory bustard fanned the flames continually with its wings, keeping the fire burning until all of the animals were fully baked. And in a wonderful Aboriginal legend from Australia, all life began in the dark, skulking its way around the earth as best it could. The spirits of the sky spent part of an eternity deciding how they would bring light into the world. They built a huge pile of sticks that they planned to ignite, but they didn't want to frighten all the beings on the ground by suddenly producing a huge burst of light when they've never seen light before. So one day, an emu named Dinawan and a brolga named Bralach sat side by side on their nests, protecting the eggs in the dark. As they talked about the children they would soon bring into the world, they began to argue about whose children would be stronger and whose would be more clever. The discussion became more and more heated, and finally, Brala grabbed one of Dinawan's eggs in her bill and used all of her strength and fury to throw it as high as she could into the air. So high did it go that it collided with the huge pile of sticks collected by the spirits. The egg broke open and the yolk spilled all over the sticks, which kindled them into a great bonfire. The sky lit up, bathed the earth in light, and showed everyone just how beautiful the earth was. And from that day forward, the spirits decided that they would build a great fire every morning to light up the earth and let it burn until evening. But they still worried that the transition to light every day would frighten the animals. So they searched for one animal who could call to everyone each morning before they lit the fire to let them know that light was on its way soon. And which animal did they choose? Well, anyone who's been to Australia knows it's the laughing kookaburra, who was only too happy to volunteer to play this important role for eternity. And to this day, this devoted bird wakes up an entire continent by calling just before sunrise. So after birds helped to get the world up and running, they continued to play pivotal roles in the early days of the Earth. One of the big surprises for me in my research for my book, The Complete Language of Birds, was the sheer number of cultures around the world that record a great flood in their origin stories. Pretty much everybody's got a great flood. So we all know the story of Noah and the ark, and that as the waters began to recede once the 40-day rain stopped, Noah released first a raven and then a dove to see if they would find land. The raven never came back, suggesting that it probably found some nice, juicy carrion to enjoy itself with. The dove, however, felt more of a duty to Noah for saving its life, so it brought back an olive leaf. This meant that land had begun to emerge from the water. But other cultures tell the story a little differently. In some areas of the United States, for example, Christians associate the painted bunting with the rainbow that God sent to Noah as a sign of his covenant with the earth. Painted buntings are the living embodiment of the rainbow, reminding us that God protects us and will not destroy his creation again. In the Birachik area of Turkey, people believe that Noah released a northern bald ibis, of all things, from the ark, a bird they see as a symbol of fertility to guide the repopulation of the earth. Meanwhile, the Athabascans of Alaska believe that the Great Flood came to an end with the help of the bittern. The bittern swallowed enormous amounts of water, flew to where more water would do the most good, and regurgitated that water to form new rivers like this braided river that we'd see in Alaska. Meanwhile, an Ojibwa legend tells us that long ago the Creator sent a great flood to purify the world and drown everything evil. One man, Wayne Abuju, worked quickly and built himself a raft and managed to keep himself and just a few animals afloat for an entire month as they waited for the water to recede. But the water didn't go down. So he summoned several different birds to dive to the bottom and retrieve some dirt from the old world, which he would then use to start a new continent. The loon was the logical savior, but he tried and he failed. The dove volunteered, but as you can probably imagine, that didn't go very well, and the dove nearly drowned. So finally, a lone coot took on the challenge. He didn't tell anyone what he intended. Time passed, and the other birds finally noticed he was gone and started to search for him. They found him floating behind the raft, unconscious, but still breathing. Sure enough, when they started to resuscitate him, they found just a little bit of mud from the bottom of the floodwater stuck to his bill. The coot had saved them, and Wayne Abushu could restart the continent. It's worth noting that many other Native American legends of the Great Flood tell the same story, but have a different waterfowl as a hero. In the Algonquin culture, for example, it's the merganser who brings up the morsel of earth, using its strong feet to push off from the raft and drive itself downward. Now, according to a Maori legend from New Zealand, the god Tawaki, who makes lightning and thunder, caused the flood when he created the crystal floor of heaven. The crystal floor caused all the water in the sky to fall on Fiordland, where the Fiordland penguin lived. This area receives some of the most torrential rain in New Zealand to this day, so the Fiordland penguins have been credited with actually making this rain fall, and perhaps even assisting Tawaki in creating the Great Flood. And in the jungles of Panama, the Great Flood serves as an origin story for the Great Tinamu. It seems that after the flood covered the world in water, the sun returned and a rainbow appeared, and the Great Tinamu, a dun-colored bird that blends right in with the surrounding foliage, saw the rainbow, and its intense colors frightened the bird. It flew away from all the other animals as they left the ark and retreated into the murkiest part of the forest. It lives there to this day, shunning color in favor of darkness. So these are just a few of the flood-related stories I found in which birds play a starring role, but these amazing birds have many more lessons to teach us throughout the world's folklore and mythology. So before I started work on the complete language of birds, I'd never thought much about what birds must have represented to ancient civilizations. We talk so much and take so for granted the knowledge that we have now, but there was once a time when people knew very little science about birds' habits and behaviors. So when these people looked at the world around them and all the things they couldn't explain, they filled in some of the gaps with birds and their amazing abilities. Here's one of my favorite examples of this. Before science understood what we do now about migration and how it happens, it seemed to many observers that birds simply vanished in the fall and reemerged in spring from whatever hiding places they had used over the winter. One of the most bizarre theories about this involves the barnacle goose, a European species not unlike our Canada goose. Theorists back in the 500s AD saw barnacles along wharves and docks and on the bottoms of their boats. So they guessed that these geese transformed into barnacles for the winter, adhered to surfaces to wait out the frigid weather, and then in spring, the warmer weather gave them the cue they needed to change back. Now, that's not the weirdest thing. Back in 350 BC, the learned Greek philosopher Aristotle theorized that swallows, with their ability to dive so close to the surface of lakes and ponds, actually dove to the bottom in fall and burrowed into the mud there to wait out the winter. Apparently, the whole oxygen thing hadn't really caught on yet. So this theory actually held on until the late 1700s, when sailors returning to Europe from warmer climates at the end of winter reported seeing flocks of swallows in Africa and managed somehow to put two and two together. And then in 1822, German villagers shot down a white stork that had a wooden spear piercing its neck. The spear's unusual wood could only have come from Africa. So, in a flash of insight, these German hunters realized that this bird must have migrated all the way to another continent and back. So, a single white stork finally changed the way ornithologists, such as they were, understood migration. That being said, so much of what people around the world attribute to birds has really nothing whatsoever to do with science. Wondrous parrots, like the imperial Amazon, the national bird of the Commonwealth of Dominica, are believed to have the ability to communicate with the spiritual realm. Not only can they fly high enough to reach the gods in the clouds, but they can actually form words. So you may need to watch what you say around one, or you may tattle to the ruling spirits, or worse, to your dead relatives. One of our favorite North American birds, the anhinga, has represented different things to different cultures. We know the bird's classic stance, holding its wings out to its sides to dry after diving for a fish dinner. Some Christians see this, of course, as a symbol of the crucifix, making the anhinga a perpetual reminder of the passion of Christ and therefore selfless, forgiving, and holy. On the other hand, the indigenous Tupi people of Brazil gave the anhinga its actual name, which means devil bird in their language. They determined that the anhinga must be a trickster and a troublemaker because the bird swims with its body submerged and only its head and neck out of the water, resembling a snake. Such a creature has got to be up to no good, right? And here's one of my favorites. Two categories of birds, magpies and mynas, require us to be especially respectful when we see them, asking after their health and their family's welfare. If we treat them with disdain or ignore them altogether, we may meet a particular fate based on how many of the birds we see together in one place. There's even a nursery rhyme to make this clear. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. So whenever you see a mina or a magpie, be sure to greet it warmly. Good afternoon, sir or miss. How are you today? Is your family well? If you're with a group and you don't want to look like a lunatic, just smile and nod or bow slightly to the bird. I'm told the birds will understand. One of my favorite stories involves the common kingfisher, a gorgeous bright blue bird of the rivers and lakes of Europe, Southeast Asia, and part of the Asian continent. This is the tragic tale of Ceyx and Alcyone, two lovers in the days when Greek culture involved many gods living on Mount Olympus. Ceyx and Alcyone were soulmates, but equally important at the time, they were particularly well matched in physical beauty. This made the couple very popular with the gods. Much as we watched The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, they watched Ceyx and Alcyone and observed their romance with very great interest. The pair married and began a life together, and they were so happy that they gave each other little nicknames, as most married couples do. Unfortunately, they chose to call one another Zeus and Hera, the names of the two gods at the very top of the Greek pantheon. Instead of flattering Zeus, this made him very angry, because Zeus is kind of a jerk. One day, when Ceyx boarded a ship to Ionia, Zeus kicked up a storm, and his wrath created a massive wave that swallowed up the ship. Ceyx drowned, and his body sank to the bottom of the sea. Hera, however, knew how devastated Alcyone would be if she never knew for certain what had happened to Ceyx. As she watched the young woman wait and weep by the shore, Hera caused Ceyx's body to wash up near where Alcyone waited for him. Alcyone, anguished by her loss, threw herself into the sea and drowned. Well, now Zeus felt remorse for the revenge he had exacted, and he resurrected both of them from the dead and turned the two lovers into halcyon birds, naming them for Alcyone. Today we know them as common kingfishers. Every summer, for 2 weeks, the winds grow calm, so kingfishers can nest on the beach and bring a brood into the world. We call these the halcyon days, a period of calm and happiness. And Alcyone remains part of the taxonomic name for several of the world's kingfishers. Have you ever wondered how goldfinches got their bright yellow color? The Iroquois people did, and the story's been passed down for generations. It seems that a fox chased a raccoon to make the little bandit its dinner. The raccoon ran up a tree, so the hungry fox waited all day at the bottom, but the raccoon didn't come down. Eventually, the fox dozed off, and when he awoke, he found that raccoon was gone, but before it left, it painted the fox's eyes shut with resin. The resin had hardened and it wouldn't come off, so the fox was blind. The fox called and called for help, and some drab little finches in the neighborhood took pity on the fox, and they flew in and pecked off the resin. The fox thanked them for this good deed and used some yellow flowers nearby to color their plumage bright yellow, the color of sunshine. The goldfinches wear this plumage all spring and summer to this day. I took a guess, maybe it was Canada goldenrod, which of course is one of the native plants that grows where the Iroquois are up here in upstate New York. The story of the trapped fox and the helpful bird is one of the tales that shows up in folklore of many different cultures, especially in the indigenous people of the United States, where it may be used to explain hummingbirds' iridescence or the bright color of the northern cardinal. We can imagine people of many different tribes coming together thousands of years ago in meeting places like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, Wupatki in Arizona, or this place now known as Aztec Ruins National Monument in New Mexico, to trade goods and tell stories in kivas or in the shadow of ceremonial mounds. One tribe might have an explanation for a specific thing that the others haven't had time to consider yet. So these stories spread and became part of one another's cultures. Few birds have inspired as many folk tales about themselves as the northern lapwing, a well-known and easily recognized bird of Europe and parts of Asia. A Swedish story, of all things, tells us of a young woman serving as a handmaiden to the Holy Mother Mary. The girl stole Mary's scissors, and Mary, a bit of a more wrathful version of the Holy Mother than we know, punished her by turning her into a northern lapwing. She chose the lapwing because its tail resembles a pair of scissors. The lapwing, this particular lapwing, only had one call. It said tavit, which is Swedish for I stole. Northern lapwing is also said to have been present at the crucifixion of Jesus. The story tells us that 3 birds came to Christ's aid on the cross. First, the stork came and called, "Strengthen him!" Then the swallow actually tried to remove the thorns from his crown and give him some relief. But finally, the northern lapwing came in, circled the cross, and cried, "Let him suffer!" Jesus blessed the stork and the swallow, but he condemned the lapwing for all time. Now we have many stories about lapwings as mischievous or even cruel birds. The lapwing's bad reputation extends all the way into Asia, where the Russian creation story says that when the Slavic god Perun made the world, he gave all the birds a job to carry water to fill many indentations of seas, lakes, and rivers. Everyone pitched in, except the lapwing, who refused. So God punished the bird by declaring that it would always have to get its water from puddles. Today, if you want to see a lapwing, you need to look in mudflats with shallow water. Honestly, just the way we would look for any bird that's kind of like a plover. Centuries later, perhaps as part of its continued punishment for all of these things, lapwing eggs became a delicacy. The eggs were not cultivated on farms because lapwings don't survive well in domestic life, so the eggs had to be found in the wild, making them a very pricey item in markets, none of which was good for the lapwings. In recent years, the practice has been banned by the European Union, but in the Netherlands, finding the first lapwing egg of the season is still a custom. There's a catch, though. The finder now has to leave the egg where it was found. So let's turn now to some of the bravest and the most superstitious people on the planet, those who ply their trade on ships at sea. Entire books have been written about the omens and portents brought by pelagic birds over boats filled with sailors, fishermen, or explorers. Seafarers especially revere the albatross, any of the 22 species, excuse me, of these magnificent birds, including this Laysan albatross we were fortunate to see in Hawaii last year. For centuries, having an albatross around your neck has been synonymous with carrying a weighty burden that we can't wait to dispose of as soon as possible. This expression, of course, comes from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, in which we learned that killing an albatross is the worst luck of all bad luck, inviting shipwreck and certain death. So how do we counteract this bad omen? The person who killed the bird must swear it on a rope around their neck, literally carrying the burden of the misdeed. An albatross can weigh as much as 18 pounds, so this penance is nothing to take lightly. Albatross lore on the high seas can govern the lives of sailors with endless speculation of whether an albatross following a ship is a good omen with a promise of the bird's protection, or a bad omen of an oncoming storm with the bird hiding behind the ship to avoid the worst of it. Whichever it turns out to be, there's another twist. The albatross most likely carries the soul of a sailor lost at sea. So whether it's good news or bad news, the bird's protection or its warning are all meant with the best of intentions. Coleridge's poem dominates seabird lore, so it may seem that albatrosses are the only birds that affect a sailor's fortune, but the family of northern storm petrels also carry considerable weight with seafarers. The storm part of the name comes from their habit of taking refuge from an oncoming gale by following closely behind a ship, letting the large structure block the worst of the weather for them. Sailors took this as a dependable warning that a storm was on its way. Some, however, thought that the birds actually brought the stormy weather with them, making a flock of storm petrels at a ship's stern a very worrisome sight. In fact, some seafarers went so far as to call it good luck if a storm petrel happened to defecate on them as it passed over them. This is probably a good time to remind you of the first rule of birding. Never look up with your mouth open. Killing a storm petrel, even in retaliation for this defecation, was and is still considered bad luck, as if the shooter wishes to invite bad weather for a very long stay. So if you want to find yourself caught at sea in the middle of a hurricane, all you have to do is shoot down a storm petrel. As long as we're on the subject of disgusting things people do at sea, fishermen of old observed gray herons, the European version of the great blue heron, or a very similar bird, standing patiently waiting for fish to swim by at just the right distance, and decided that something about the heron's feet must attract the fish. So they carried a heron's foot to improve their luck, and some coated their fishing lines with a noxious goo that they made from heron's fat and feet. As this practice has faded, we can assume it was not very effective and maybe intolerably gross. I also learned some fairly dark things about birds' lives, and I made a point of including these in the book as well because my readers need to know that some of the world's birds face challenges from people with very selfish ends. The parrots of the Caribbean islands, for example, have been poached nearly to death for the black market on pet birds. Some of the islands have moved to name these birds as their national symbols, which has released funds and organized efforts to save them. But on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to see the parrots that were once abundant there. You need special permission to go into wildlife refuges that have highly elevated levels of protection. And then we have the fate of the ortolan, a tiny bird that has had the bad luck of becoming a delicacy in parts of Europe. The recipe is gruesome. They fatten the bird up for more than 3 weeks in a cage and then actually kill it by drowning it in Armagnac brandy. The chef then cooks it and serves it whole, and the gourmands who eat this ortolan pop it down in one bite, but first they toss a napkin over their face so they won't be seen stuffing their mouths with this morsel. Only the beak remains on the plate when they're finished. I'm glad to report that the European Union has banned this practice, but there are still corners of Europe where the name ortolan makes mouths water. Finally, let's talk about birds that don't exist. As we have seen, long before we began to understand birds in scientific terms, miraculous flying creatures became part of nearly every culture's mythology. Sometimes, though, the powers of actual living birds just didn't rise to the level of being godlike. Birds needed to do something more, meld with the body of a god or goddess, for example, or become the lead character in a myth so vivid that it needs a supernatural species to tell it. Creating birds that have supernatural powers makes them larger than life, allowing us to attach all manner of deeds and stories to them. This makes these mythical birds the catalyst for just about any situation that requires an explanation beyond the ordinary. They may have the ability to heal the sick, determine if crops will thrive or wither, bestow happy marriages and fidelity on lucky couples, bring good luck and prosperity, or guide people to new lands where they can build their capital city. In Egypt, the god Thoth takes on the mantle of a bird, specifically an African sacred ibis, while he controls the passage of time and the change of seasons. Thoth is the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, hieroglyphics, science, magic, and art. So he's a busy dude. The ibis head allows him to change the pace of the passage of time. Special note, this only works for Thoth. Don't try it at home. On the flip side of this benevolence, a mythical bird called the uzlum provides an excuse for foolishness, shifting the blame for mistakes away from humans and onto a bird just too silly to behave itself. In British and Australian legend, uzlum flies in a spiral of tighter and tighter circles until it eventually flies up its own butt. I'm guessing that everyone here knows an uzlum in some kind of form. Here's the feng huang, or Chinese phoenix, one of China's 12 ornaments or ancient symbols that denoted the power and authority of the wearer. The ornaments date back to at least 2294 BC, and perhaps much earlier than that, embroidered on the clothing of high-ranking people in Chinese society. The description of this beast has changed over the millennia, so this one follows the most recent descriptions, more or less. A golden pheasant's head, a mandarin duck's body, a peacock's tail, a crane's legs, and a parrot's bill. And wherever the feng huang appears, it implies the virtue and the honesty of the people it adorns. It often appears in weddings as a blessing of fidelity and harmony, and some households bring it out to display it in good times and hide it away when times turn tough. Now, exactly how and when we acquired the legend of the phoenix has been a subject of debate for thousands of years. It appears long before Greek mythology cemented the story of an immortal bird who eventually tired of its cushy life in paradise. Phoenix traveled in the mortal world where things live and die, but the bird knew that he would remain immortal. Well, one night, Phoenix built a nest of twigs, and as he waited for Apollo, the sun god, to arrive, he began to sing. Morning came, and Apollo passed over in his golden chariot. But the sun god so admired Phoenix's song that he actually stopped in midair to listen. As he enjoyed the song, a spark from the sun dropped down onto Phoenix's nest of twigs. The nest ignited, and Phoenix burst into flames, dissolving into ashes. But all was not lost for Phoenix. 3 days later, the magical bird sprang up from the ashes, young and renewed. The bird realized that he could do this again and again, but he understood somehow that he would have to wait 1,000 years for his next renewal. So he continues to repeat this cycle of death and rebirth as he will for eternity. So that's the complete language of birds, with stories about nearly 400 species of birds around the world. It's illustrated rather than photographic, as you've seen, with vintage drawings by a wide range of artists, most of them from the 19th and early 20th centuries. This was an utterly delightful book to write, combining my love of birds, natural science, and history. I hope it's as much fun for you as it was for me. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. Now I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Randy. That is incredible. That's just a few stories that you have researched and we're learning about. You took us like across the globe through time, through in different cultures. I've learned so much. And so I am going to share some questions from the audience. Just a reminder, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll go through as many as possible. Um, the first question I think we're all interested is kind of how long did this take you, all this research, all the writing of this book? What was the process like?
Well, it's funny how this came about. An editor that I had worked with at another publisher called me and asked me to take on this book. It's part of a larger series. So there's a book, Complete Language of Flowers, Complete Language of Herbs, and so on and so forth. And it was time for them to do birds, and they needed somebody who knew that, field. So I was hired to do this in June, and it was due in December. So it was a
Oh,
very,
wow.
yeah, it was compact.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I essentially threw caution to the winds and delved into this thing. And I mean, the miracle of the internet is great. It at least gave me some leads on where to find these stories, but some of them I actually had to call libraries in other countries to say, gee,
Mm.
I've heard this story. Do you know of a book? Do you know of a place? And in one case, they actually scanned a handwritten story for me out of the Caribbean and sent it to me. So which was wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
power of libraries. Libraries are still a thing that we need.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of that kind of digging up of stories. One of the things that's in this book is the collective nouns for each species. And I didn't make any of these up. They are for real. Somewhere in the world they are in use. So we all know a murder of crows, a parliament of owls. My personal favorite was a Durante of toucans. For those of you who may be too
Yeah.
young, Jimmy Durante was an actor with a huge schnoz, and he would have loved that. That's what they called the toucans.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that brings me to my second question is kind of what stories or tales did you discover that you weren't able to fit into the book because of lack of research or just space in the book? Yeah.
well, the publisher um, supplied me with the list of birds. So, and I made some substitutions that I went through and said, well, there's really nothing about nothing that interesting about this one. Can I replace it with this really interesting other bird? But there are many birds in Africa yet that I just didn't have the space, unfortunately, to explore,
Mm,
as well as the fascinating stories out of New Zealand and Papua New Guinea and places
mm,
where there's less interaction at this point between the indigenous people and someone like me, or people in the cities for the most part. There are a lot of stories that I would have loved to, get into and tell longer tales, but this
mm.
format just didn't permit that. So there may, who knows, down the road, there may be another book that has more.
Yeah, second edition coming soon.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. We have another question. How did
Mhm.
you curate the beautiful art in your book?
Boy, that was not easy. One of
Mm,
the, the publisher had pretty much set the standard for what these books looked like with all the previous ones in the series. So it was a matter of finding, in all honesty, royalty-free artwork from
mhm,
hundreds of years ago, or at least 100 years ago. Um, a lot of it is Victorian or in that general time, and is actually was found in books from that era. So it's long since out of copyright, but very beautiful and very appropriate. We had about 20 birds that we could not find illustrations for. But also, as I'm sure some of you recognize from the cover, there's quite a bit of Audubon in here because
mhm.
that artwork is long since, out of copyright. So there were a lot of things in the old days before photography. There were a lot of beautiful illustrations and plates and so on of birds, and those are the ones that we spent a lot of time looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I peeked at the book and it's really incredible. I love the format and I love the images. They're amazing. I
Thank
get
you.
this is yeah, of course. I think we all might know this story, but where does the idea of a stork bringing a baby come from? Do you happen to know?
Oh, I did try to dig into that because it's funny that there are birds in different uh different cultures that also bring the baby. Like Mexico has a different bird that brings the baby. So, it's not a it's a very old story. And you know what? I know it's in here. I don't know exactly how old it is, but I know that it's here in the book. Yeah, let me see if I can find it, and I can send you that rather than hold everybody up looking for it.
Yeah, definitely. We'll put it in the follow-up.
Yes.
Um, um, Great. And I guess we have a question a little bit to learn a little bit more about yourself. What kind of sparked your interest in birds, and in the work you do? Mm.
Oh my. Well, there was a time in my life when I worked in the theater. And theater is as this is the New York audience. You know what theater is. It's evenings and weekends and takes over your life. And I finally made the move out of theater to the private sector and suddenly had all my evenings and weekends free. And my husband, who grew up with a mom who birded, said to me, you might really enjoy bird watching. And we got a little feeder on our window in our apartment, and uh, house finches showed up and like pink birds. Holy cow, what is this? And I was
Yeah.
completely hooked like the first day. And over time, that grew to being able to travel and see birds all over the country. And Nick, my husband, is also a wonderful nature photographer. So he started photographing birds, and this led to our being able to do all of these books and our quick reference guides to the Birds, Trees, and Wildflowers of New York City and New York State. And, now we have Birding Texas and Birding Florida and, books from all over the country. So it just, birding is more than a passion. It's a lifestyle. And
Yeah.
yeah, so we were able to subsidize our birding habit with the books and then also the books that I write about America's national parks as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we can all agree with that sentiment. Once you start birding, you're kind of hooked.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah. We have another question. I'm gonna make this a little bit more general, but do you have any tales about owls in your book that you might know off the top of your head? Um,
Wow. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, there are quite a number of owl stories, and I let me make a just look real quick because I'm pretty sure I know which ones here. Snowy's in here, isn't he? Snowy Owl 062. Yeah, it's funny how this book is set up that it's all in the it's according to the Latin name, which most people would not necessarily
mm,
know.
mhm.
So and then they are numbered according to that. So you looking things up in here is a little bit tricky. But yeah, here, okay, snowy owl, certainly an owl of mystery. Indigenous peoples of the Arctic believe this bird to be a messenger, carried terrestrial wisdom to the elders, and a human favored by the snowy owl receives the words of the elders through intuition and translates them to share with the community. They also believe that snowy owls can glide into the spirit world to bring back ancient wisdom from the void of great mystery, revealing secrets that have been hidden to humans for ages. So there are a lot of stories like
Yeah.
that about owls. Owls, as we all know, fascinate people probably more than
Yeah,
any other
definitely.
bird. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
lots of stories about owls being smarter than we are.
Oh, this is a great question that just came in. Are there any cultures where the mythology of birds is still part of their daily culture? They're still present.
Daily culture. Well, birds have become, particularly the parrots of the Caribbean that are all, you know,
Hmm.
very, very endangered at this point. Those birds are part of their daily culture because they're so involved in protecting them. Also,
Mm,
the other one that comes to mind along those lines is the Guam rail. There's only maybe 40 or 50 of them left on Guam because they were all eaten by the brown tree snakes that came over on the ships of the military in the 1940s during World War II. So that those birds become it's not so much a worshipful kind of thing, but
hmm.
the process of saving those birds, as well as the parrots of the Caribbean, and protecting them on a daily basis from all of the invasive species that have come to eat them. Those have become very much an obsession for those cultures.
Mm, yeah, definitely. And I think we saw in your lecture that a lot of the stories do still describe things we see today or topics we still deal with today. And so I guess that brings me to my question of how you think, why you think it's important that we connect science to mythology and um, yeah, and how that is important to birds in particular. Hmm.
For me, the what this really doing this research, what this really restored for me was that sense of wonder.
Mm,
That we
yeah.
we can be very clinical about our birds these days, counting individuals and, being out on the Christmas bird count and, keeping our records on eBird and so on. And, running to birders tend to want to go from, one bird to the next one, to the next one, to the next one very
Yeah.
quickly.
Mhm.
Like, I got a life bird. Now I want 6 more. I was just in Hawaii, so I know how that feels. But to step back and see birds through the eyes of people who didn't know any of that, who couldn't keep those records, who didn't, um, weren't, measuring the wingspans or any of those things, but who looked at birds and said, those are creatures that can fly, and I can't. So something must be very special about them, and it must have come from the gods. And to elevate birds that way and remember that level of amazement about them. I think it's important, as especially now as we're facing challenges of climate change and all of the things that
Mhm.
are and domestic cats and all of the things that are affecting bird numbers, um, to remember that these are wondrous beings. Whether or not they can actually talk to the gods, they are they are amazing and remarkable, and it's a good thing to look at them that way and step back and think, I want to keep that. I want that to be on Earth forever.
Yeah, definitely. I think in New York City, just being on the Atlantic Flyway, like just knowing that this is just a pit stop to their whole entire journey, like that, learning
Mhm.
that for me personally was just really incredible and mind-blowing that, I don't think I've ever traveled that long and these little guys are doing that. And so, yeah, I think you bring a great point up that this is just curiosity and how can we continue to unlock that, right?
Right, exactly.
Mm.
That's exactly it.
So we're almost out of time, but I do want to ask two final questions. Um, this one I'm not sure if you know, but someone did ask, how did the eagle become a symbol of the United States?
Well, the story that you see in the play 1776 is not far from reality.
Mhm.
It really was John Adams that advocated for the bald eagle. Even though, some people really said that's a scavenger, that's a fish-eating bird. Oh, heavens forbid, all of those kinds of things. But the majesty of the bald eagle in the end won out, and its ability to fight for itself and to be independent of all other birds. That really was what made it the symbol of the United States. There's another story about Benjamin Franklin advocating for the turkey. That's not actually true.
Mhm.
Franklin had a conversation with I think his niece, that is obviously in writing, because that's how he corresponded with everyone. Um, but in which he described the turkey as he said, a nobler bird than the eagle, but he never advocated for it to become the national bird. It was just a side
Mm.
conversation with someone else.
Mm. Well, I guess the last question I'll ask you is kind of like, what's next for you? Where can we find you? Um, yeah, let us know.
Sure. I'm working on a book right now called The Bear at the Bird Feeder, which is
Mm.
about animals cohabiting, essentially, wild animals with people in cities and how we can live in harmony with them.
Mm.
Essentially, we have moved into their territory. They aren't moving into ours. So we have to find ways to make that work. And there's lots and lots of ways out there. And so I'm collecting them in a book so that people can feel comfortable knowing that there are deer or turkeys or Canada geese, right
Yeah,
in their area. I know I've seen that the turkeys are starting to move into Manhattan now, so that's an
yeah,
interesting thing. The
yeah, they're
Staten
definitely
Island
in Staten
problem is,
Island. Yeah.
oh God, yes. Um, so that's what I'm working on. You can find me at my website, Minetor.com. You can sign up there for my newsletter. Minotaur, by the way, is Minetor, not like the mythical beast. And you can sign up for our newsletter so you'll get the quarterly alerts, or you can follow us on Amazon. Um, and I'm also on Facebook at Minotaur Books.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You definitely have to keep us updated with that book that you're writing. I will definitely be interested in that.
Oh,
Thank you so
absolutely.
much, Randy, for joining us tonight. I think our audience, I see a lot of thank yous. I'm a fan. So love the
Oh,
information, people. Great, interesting book lecture. So thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, all of you, joining us tonight. This is the first of our winter lecture series, so please make sure to check out the rest of our schedule. We'll have one monthly through March. I'm going to drop in the Zoom the program's calendar for you guys to check it out, as well as um, where you can find the book as well. But thank you, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Randy. Have a
thank
good one.
you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.